Alright guys, so do you remember a brand called Bencler? They had a successful Kickstarter a couple of years ago with a watch called the Bencler Rocks. That was a dive watch. So this is actually the same brand, but they have actually changed the name now. They're now Bramier. So you could say this is a spiritual successor to that watch, because this is the Bramier Rocks Trilayer GMT. But with one big difference, it's missing the rock part. If you've got no idea what I'm on about, then stick around and we'll get into it as we get into the review. So this one is going to be launching on Kickstarter in June. Not sure the exact date just yet, but I'll leave the link to the website down in the description so you can get notified when it does actually come up and there's more information available. But let's get down into it now. So they've got a few different dial colours. The one I've got here is the green one, but they also do a blue, and I think the other one's like a teal kind of colour. Again, link down in the description if you want to see them. Before we get into any more detail though, first of all let's go over the dimensions. So we've got a diameter of 41.5mm, but then if you take into account the bezel, it actually comes in at 42, because it is sticking out ever so slightly past that case. Then when it comes to the thickness, coming in at 13.6mm, lug width is 22mm. Then when it comes to the all-important lug to lug, that's coming in at 48.9mm. So some interesting dimensions going on, but we'll talk about that in a bit more detail a bit later on. And then when it comes to the weight on this bracelet, with all the links included, it's coming in at 181 grams. Then size for my 7-inch wrist, it's coming in at about 168. But then we've also got the strap as well. So when it comes to that, I'll quickly show you that now. And here it is. So the weight on the strap is coming in at 98 grams. And then here's a closer look at it. So we've got an unbranded buckle. So it's kind of vintage style leather, similar to the type that you get from Vario, if you're aware of them. We've also got a quick release on that, which is nice to see. And then you can see it's 22mm lug width, as I said. And then we've got top grain leather, so pretty nice strap. And obviously, depending on what colour you get, that'll match the watch. Getting back to the bracelet though, take a closer look at this. So it's got a H-link bracelet, mixture of brushed and polished. And then it's also polished on the sides as well. But they are going to change something slightly, so this clasp here is going to be different on the final version. I'll pop a picture on screen so you can see what it's like. Then moving on to the case back. You can see we've got a display case back there, as well as that really nice custom rotor. But we have actually got the old branding on there. So I'm assuming for the final version that will be changed to the newer branding. And the same goes for the text around the outside as well. Then the other text we've got on there is 200 meter water resistance, stainless steel, and then the model name. We'll talk about the movement a bit later on, but first of all we'll finish going over the head of the watch. And the first thing you're probably going to notice is that crown does seem a little bit odd, the positioning of it. It's quite low on the case. It's also slightly smaller than I'd like as well. Although that being said, because it is lower on the case, you can actually get it from underneath quite easily. And it also brings it down out of the way of that bezel, so you're not knocking the bezel when you're using it. So I kind of get why they've done it. But again, I would have just liked it to be slightly larger though. When it comes to the case finishing, we've got fully brushed sides and top, just with that polished chamfered edge. And it integrates nicely with the bracelet as well. Now you can also see that crystal and the way it integrates nicely with that bezel. It is actually ever so slightly sunken below the bezel. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be the case of the final version, but that's what it's like on this prototype I've got here. But it still looks good either way. But because there is that ever so slight lip, it will actually be a little bit awkward to wipe it, because it will catch on the edge of that bezel and kind of collect around the edge. So something to be aware of if they do keep it the same. But now let's get onto the dial and talk about that in a bit more detail, because there's quite a lot of interesting things going on with this. Starting with why it's called the Trilayer. So obviously there are 3 different layers to the dial, as the name implies, which you can see on screen with that exploded view, which is from the website. But let's take a proper look at it now on the actual watch, because I think it's a good looking dial. So we've got applied indices, so the lume should be good, which we'll check out in a bit. Then when it comes to the branding, it's not really all that obvious it's actually on there. So it's actually on the bottom of that 24-hour section on that inner ring, just outside of that GMT disc that is in the centre, which again is something pretty different, not something I've seen before. And I'll show you that in action when we're talking about the movement a little bit later. But going over the rest of the dial, we've got that date window at the 4:30. Not my favourite position for it. Looks a little bit crammed in there, and the cutout could be slightly larger maybe. When it comes to the hands, they're also quite interesting. So they're semi-skeletonized, but they're actually alternating. So the minute hand has got the section at the end, whereas the hour hand has got it at the base. So you can easily distinguish between the two. Do quite like the way they've done that. It allows that 24-hour ring to be able to be visible without the hour hand getting in the way and obscuring it. And I just like the different finishes they've got on the different sections as well. And it just adds a little bit of depth to the dial as well, with the different layers. But one thing it's missing is that rock-like textured finish that was actually on the previous watch, which is where it got its name from. So I don't really know why they've left that off there, a little bit strange. But now let's find out whether we've got sapphire crystal on this, using the trusty diamond selector 2. And yep, we've got sapphire crystal, but we've also got a sapphire bezel as well, if I can get this to sit on it properly. Ooh, try again. Yep, there we go. So as you can see, sapphire bezel too, which is a nice touch, and not something you see all that often really. So let's talk about that bezel in a bit more detail. So you know it's sapphire, but it's also 120 click as well. Nice action on it, and it is also bi-directional. Personally, I think it would have been better if it had been a 24 click to go with a 24-hour bezel, but it's not too bad. It works well enough. Let me know, what do you prefer on a GMT watch with a 24-hour bezel? Now let's get on to one of the main selling points with this watch though, and that is the movement. So it's the Miyota 9075, so that's a true GMT. If you're not sure what that is, I will show you how it works now, because it is quite interesting, not your usual GMT movements. Works slightly differently. So if we unscrew the crown to begin with, so pop it out to the first position. In fact, I'll pop it out to the second position so we can move those hands so you can see them more clearly. And while we're doing that, you'll be able to see that disc in the centre is actually turning around as well. So the marker on there pointing to the 24-hour markers on that inner disc. And you can also see as well, the second hand has stopped, so we have got hacking too. So now if we pop it back in, second hand will re-engage, pop it out to that first position now. And then if we turn it one way, you'll see that hour hand is moving independently, and you can move that backwards and forwards as well. And you'll also be able to see when we do that, that date window is actually changing back and forth depending on which way I'm moving it. So that is how you change the date as well. So if you are using this as a proper GMT and you're going to be changing the date a lot, that is quite handy to have. But if you're not, it could be a slight issue because it's the only way you can change the date. So if you don't wear the watch for a while, you might need to change that date going through with the hour hand moving round. So that is why that crown is lower down, I think. So when you're winding it, you're not going to be hitting that bezel and knocking it and moving it. So I can see why they've put the crown where they have, because you will potentially be using this quite a lot. So now all that's out of the way, you're probably wondering, what is the loom like? Is it any good? We've got applied indices, so it should be, but let's find out now. So we've got a bit there already, but let's charge it up, give it a proper chance. And there we go. So it's looking really good initially. The colour's not looking quite as it does in reality. Hopefully the camera will adjust in a second. We've actually got BGW9 on this. So you've got that ice blue colour. So because we've got that sapphire dial, we can get that fully illumined section on the bottom half of the bezel, which does look good. I'm a little bit concerned that the loom on the numbers on the top section might fade quite quickly because there's just not as much surface area. Same goes for that GMT marker on that inner rotating disc. But apart from them, it's all looking pretty good so far. It's consistent across the hands and the indices, no patchiness at all, which is always good to see. And despite those hands being semi-skeletonized, we've still got a decent amount of loom on there. But the question as always is, what's the longevity like? Let's speed this up now and find out. So to begin with, as you'd expect, not a great deal of change. Although that inner rotating disc with that marker is fading pretty quickly. The top half of the bezel, similarly starting to fade a little bit, but the rest of it is still looking really impressive. Not really faded that much at all. And if we just keep it going a little bit longer, see if it changes. No, not really. So, as I say, impressive loom. You're not going to be disappointed with it. The main bits you need are going to last a good amount of time. So now you're probably wondering, how much is all this going to cost you? As I say, I haven't got the exact prices for all of them. I've got the super early bird price, and that's it so far. But again, if you want any more information, the link will be down in the description. So the super early bird price is €459. That's $497, £390. And I think for that price, that's pretty good. With the movement you're getting, that true GMT, the fact that we've got sapphire bezel and sapphire crystal, both front and back, the bracelet and the strap, that pretty impressive loom, and that unique GMT function with that inner rotating disc. It's got some interesting stuff going on. But you probably want to see what it's like on wrist on both the bracelet and the strap, so we'll do that now. So here it is on my 7-inch wrist on the bracelet, and I think it suits the watch really well. Looks really good. I like the polished details catching the light, and despite being a slightly larger watch, it still wears nicely on my 7-inch wrist I think, with that pretty compact lug to lug still. Those female land links helping with that. That being said though, I do think it is slightly on the thick side. Would have been nice if they'd been able to shave a few mil off that just to get it down a little bit. Just make it slightly slimmer. And again, when it comes to that bracelet, don't forget they are changing that clasp ever so slightly. But overall, I think it looks pretty good. Yeah, there's a few little bits I'd change, like maybe that date window to make it slightly bigger, perhaps add more loom for that GMT marker on that inner rotating disc, but now I'll show you on the strap. And here it is. And again, I think it suits the watch really well. I've actually been wearing it on this more than the bracelet, because I like it that much. As I say, similar kind of straps to the ones that Vario do, and again, wears nicely on wrist. And obviously if you go for a different dial colour, you'll get a matching strap to go with that. So, as I say, overall, I think it's a pretty good package. The main thing I would like to see changed is that thickness. Just reduce that down a bit, and I think you've got a really great watch. As it is, it's still nice, but might be a touch thick for some people maybe. But that being said, with the diameter being 41.5 or 42 including that bezel, this is going to be a watch for bigger guys anyway probably, so that might not be an issue. One thing that might be a slight issue maybe is the crown. Perhaps it could be slightly larger, but with the way they've positioned it, I think they can kind of get around that. It kind of works, but personally I'd like to see it just slightly larger. But I definitely think the positives outweigh the negatives for this one. As I said, you've got that sapphire sandwich, sapphire bezel, that Miyota 9075 true GMT movement, pretty interesting use of the GMT with that inner rotating disc, the tri-layer dial, that pretty impressive loom. As I say, overall, I think it justifies its price, and it's a good watch. I think it's a good looking piece. That's one of the main things. So if you are still interested, the link down in the description will be to the website where you can sign up for the Kickstarter notification when it goes live, and they'll probably add more information. But that's it for this one guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.